right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to MORE-VILLE, Orville, the podcast dedicated to reviewing episodes of everyone's favorite sci-fi comedy, The Orville. I'm your co-host, Mike L., and I'm joined by G.I. Jolie.
That's me. I'm G.I. Jolie.
Also, Chimp Ian.
How you doing, guys? It's been a while. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. You guys are looking good. How's your week been?
Oh my goodness. It's been a lot of watching The Orville and nothing else. Nothing else.
Woo! Nothing better than that.
I mean, I snuck in an episode of Peacemaker, but that is not what this podcast is about.
Yes, that's another podcast. Hopefully one day. That's a great show. But anyway, we're here to talk about The Orville. We have now reached episode 3, which is probably the best episode of the series so far. This one is called About a Girl, which is a reference to a Nirvana song that I love. And Champ Ian Phillips, you are the guy who's good at summarizing episodes. But before we jump into that, I just want to say quickly, this episode was directed by Brandon Braga. Are you guys familiar with that name?
Yeah, I've heard of him before. I've seen his name show up in the end credits of various actual Star Trek episodes here and there.
Yes. He was one of the producers of Star Trek The Next Generation. He was also
Voyager.
one of the main... What's that?
Also Voyager.
Yes. He was the one, as far as I know, and I could be wrong, that kind of saved Voyager halfway through the series. He came in and kind of improved things. As far as I know, I could be wrong about that. I haven't done any research.
Yeah, he was the showrunner until the 6th season. And then they moved him to Enterprise.
Which I didn't like. But anyway, that's another story. But anyway, so, I mean, he brings some of that old Next Generation magic that we all love, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, basically, Ian, you're going to tell us what episode 3 is about. Orville episode 3, About a Girl.
This episode, About a Girl, it picks up at the end of where episode 2 leaves off, which is a little cliffhanger. Bortus and his partner, Clyden, they're both members of an all-male species, and they have just had a baby girl. And they're both shocked, and they don't know what to do about the situation. And this episode revolves around them coming to terms with this and dealing with the societal pressure that comes from what the standard procedure to do when this happens is to have gender reassignment surgery to make their child, quote unquote, conform. And they, the Moclans get involved. They send a ship. It becomes a diplomatic issue because this is something that the Orville crew is absolutely aghast about. They think that this is a barbaric practice. And the Moclans take the complete opposite side, and they compare it to surgeries that are done by our species as a matter of course. Cleft palates, that sort of thing. They look at it as correcting a simple birth defect. And at the end of the day, they have a tribunal on the Moclan homeworld where Kelly Grayson acts as essentially their lawyer in this case, and tries to convince them that no, she can have a perfectly happy life living out the way that she is. They scan the planet and they find evidence of more Moclan females, one of which they bring to the tribunal, and to the horror of the people there, because most of them have never seen a female Moclan before. And she's essentially regarded with disgust until they realize that she is actually secretly the Moclan's most storied author. Mm-hmm. And they quote her extensively. But at the end of the day, it doesn't work, and they rule that the surgery has to continue, and it does. And that's where the episode ends off.
So I'm just going to say quickly, of the many things that are great about this episode, my favorite thing about it is that the Orville crew loses. That they do everything they can to convince the jury of why that they're right, but in the end they lose. And it's something that often happened in Star Trek. And I remember there was a famous quote by Captain Picard where he said something like, sometimes you can do everything right and still lose. It's not, of course I can't remember the quote, but he said that's just part of life. And I think it's a great lesson to learn. And it's also a great example of good writing, right? Where not everything gets wrapped up in a little bow at the end of every story. And the fact that, they kind of just have to live with the decision, again, is something that we all have to do. So yeah, I think this episode is the best one so far. G.I. Jolie, what did you think?
I also think it is the best episode so far. It has given me one of my favorite television characters to date. And the morality issues, the ethics issues that they explore in this episode are so serious. There are things that they're not even undercurrents in current social discourse. There are things that are happening right on the top. And Seth MacFarlane is just no bones about it, cutting right to the core about what each of these characters' thoughts and feelings are about pretty much the gender debate. But here's the thing with with all the talk of seriousness, it was probably also the funniest episode to date as well. We get some really great scenes between the characters. We get a really great Lamar and Malloy scene. But I mean, we can go into that later. Overall, I think it's one of the best episodes to date.
Mm-hmm. Ian, what do you think of the episode? You think it's good?
I thought this was a very, very strong episode. There were a couple of things about it that kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit. The fact that they brought this author in, sort of like it left me scratching my head as to how they were able to find her and know that this is who she was, and it all seemed very convenient. I think it was a bit of a Star Trek callback as well. Like you can see, if you're familiar with Star Trek: The Next Generation, you can see little bits that they pull from other episodes. And when they brought her in, I was instantly remembered of the scene where Captain Picard found the woman who was Worf's nurse, essentially, when he was on trial for being a traitor, and he brought her into the tribunal, and it made for this big scene. I'm like, oh, that's that exact scene from there. So that kind of pulled me out of the episode a little bit. It was a little too close a callback, I think, especially considering I don't understand how they found her, really.
I don't either. It kind of just happened.
Yeah, like it was very, very convenient.
I think the way that they found her wasn't a stretch so much as how Ed came to the conclusion that he could find someone like her on the planet. He calls up to he leaves the courtroom, for lack of a better Moclan name that we aren't given. He leaves the courtroom and calls up to the ship and speaks to Isaac. And they use the technology on the ship to scan the surface of the planet for what we find out is a female Moclan.
Mm-hmm.
It is a little.
It's not a stretch that they were able to find female Moclans. Once it became clear that this was a surgery that was done, it isn't that much of a stretch that there would be female Moclans on the planet somewhere. But just the fact that they were able to find the one who also happened to be secretly their most cherished author.
Right.
That was incredibly convenient.
That was stretching
especially for that to not pay off at all. Right? Like it eventually had no bearing on the outcome of the story.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. I mean, as far as the issue addressed, this obviously addresses sexual identity. It also addresses. I'm glad that they mentioned what's it called? Circumcision. I'm really glad they did, because this is an issue that it's one of those ones where a person can, in one breath, champion the idea of like invading Africa to save the girls from genital mutilation, but in the next breath they can talk about, circumcising their own son, right, in North America. So
yeah, because in the name of cultural tradition,
right? And it's one of those issues where I've brought it up with my friend who had a son. And he's like, I'm not really sure what to do, and this, that, and the other. And I said, well, the only reason to do it is because of religion. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, no, that's the only reason to do it. It's the only reason it exists. It started as a Jewish thing. It's also a Muslim thing. Anyway, we're not going to get into it. But the point is that the point of these types of stories is it makes us question everything we believe, right? Like everything we take for granted. We all have some type of cognitive dissonance, right? Just like the previous episode sort of addressed, our treatment of animals, our treatment of people or beings that are less intelligent than us. Maybe it didn't do it quite as well as this one did. But at the very least, it doesn't necessarily have to tell us how to think, but at least it makes us question our own values, which I think is what makes this show great. And what makes Star Trek great.
Exactly, because you see two Moclans partnered. So it has a great way of showing how something on the surface that you don't question, and in this case, Clyden and Bortus are the symbol of homosexual relations, in my opinion. So they are sort of the queer baseline, but not everything is as black and white as allyship. Like, you know what I mean? Where you have to. There's more things at play than just sexual preference on the surface. You know what I mean? Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think what's interesting is that they sort of stand in for a same-sex relationship, but at the same time, in their culture, that is the norm, right? So it's not even like they're going against the grain of their culture. They're the norm. It's only abnormal, well, for lack of a better term, because of our culture, right? Which I think is even more interesting.
Yeah. And I think that's what's really great, because it shows that, like, as progressive as you can seem, or like whatever that symbol of whatever future, and this is like the closest I can see to like Gene Roddenberry's utopian society, sort of this symbolism behind like their marriage. This is what the future looks like, where there's a whole race of, quote, male Moclans. Moclans are only males. So it's not even that males partner with another male and mate for life. It's not even a question. It's because it's in their culture and they don't know any different. It's a great symbol for what for the whole, like, the idea of the utopia, you know?
Yeah.
But again, there are even fallacies in that, those utopian standards. Like, oops, sometimes females are born into this race that everyone thought was male. And you don't hear about it because they are quietly reassigning their genders at birth.
Yeah.
And then once it's found out about, it becomes a huge thing to the people who are not in the culture. So the people who are not in the culture come in and they try to change that culture and try to prove that what they're doing, their centuries, their lifelong traditions or customs are incorrect based on this viewing of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. You too could be female and guide Santa and save Christmas. Your true potential could be met if your gender is not reassigned. But like you said, everything's not peachy keen and perfect, and at the end of the day, I hate that saying, at the end of the episode, she becomes he is Topa, and the tradition of Moclan males continues.
Right.
And I don't hate it. I don't hate it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing, is that it makes us question everything, and it also addresses Gene Roddenberry's concept of the Prime Directive, right? Which basically said that the Starfleet was not allowed to interfere with other cultures, right? And that's this kind of addresses that, the idea that the only reason that they even want to interfere is because they're imposing their own. What is it? The Union? What are they called?
The Planetary Union, and that's a question I'm not sure about. Does the Planetary Union have a non-interference directive like the Prime Directive?
That's the thing, is I don't think they've outright said it. It's more just that I guess I'm just pointing out that is the only reason, is because everyone on the ship, other than Bortus, to them this is
barbaric,
outrageous, right? To Bortus, this is just like, no, this is just the way it is, right? So it addresses that issue of like interfering with another culture, I guess, not with specifically the Prime Directive, but so yeah, that's the reason I think it's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, clearly this is, again, even if some people don't like the humor, as far as I know, Discovery's not doing shows like this, are they? They're not doing social commentary. Picard, like, I don't want to complain about Picard, but like, there's so many stupid things they did. One of the things Picard did was they portray people smoking. Smoking was specifically referenced to have been kind of extinct at a certain point hundreds of years in the past. That's just one example.
See, I'm gonna say I haven't seen Picard because I don't care. But
right.
I personally don't have any problem with that. If you watch, like, going back to what I said about my first experiences with Star Trek, the movies, Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3, if you watch transporter room scenes in those movies, there is a sign up right next to the transporter that shows some guidelines and rules for how to use the transporter. Rule number 1, no smoking.
Come on, really?
It's right there on the sign.
I never noticed
It's right
that.
there on the sign. Now, this is certainly a couple hundred years before Next Generation, but it does show that smoking at this point in the Star Trek universe is enough of a thing that you have to tell people not to do it in the transport.
Sure, but that's just one example. Another example is Next Generation addressed that they got rid of money. Picard, there's money everywhere, you know? Now, again, you could probably find examples that prove that there still is money. It's more just the fact that Next Generation went out of their way to avoid certain things and to establish certain things, and Picard seems to purposely throw all of them out the window just to make it hipper and more, I guess, modern, like 2022 modern. But anyway, getting back to this show, I don't even know what my point was. But anyway, yeah, I just like the fact that they're getting back to the idea of exploring a utopia and what that means, and also addressing relative morality. That's that's what I like about this episode.
I think this episode got a little bit out of its depth, to be completely honest. I think I understand what it was trying to do, but I don't know if... You see, the fact that the Moclans are an all-male race made the fact that their child was born female, it made it seem like the Moclan perspective wasn't a bad perspective, if that makes sense. There's no females in the species at all. So you could see from their perspective how that would be something more akin to a cleft palate for them. Mm-hmm. Whereas had they started the episode where, yes, there are females in the Moclan species, but it's just a lower caste. If they were to have played it like that,
sure,
where they had this argument between Bortus and Clyden, we don't want our child to be a part of this lower caste, then I think you have some drama. But
they played both.
Kinda.
Yeah.
But like when you think about it, they're arguing, okay, they should keep this child the way that she was born. Well, generally, like in the Moclan species, you're essentially condemning them to a lifetime of being a second-class citizen now. And I don't know. Like I think that it could have been played a little bit better.
Well, okay.
Yeah, do you know what? You bring that up and it's like, okay, then bringing in the character device or the device of bringing in Gondis Eldon and then finding out that their most revered poet is this woman, then that would have been stronger if they weren't. If there's more than just her, right? Yeah.
If there's
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
If there was like an entire culture of Moclan females that was just regarded as being inferior, then I think you have a compelling story. But compared to, like, say if humans had an entire race of people with cleft palates, since that's an example that they use, then it might be something that we would look at as being, well, maybe this isn't a surgery that we should take so lightly, right? Like if there's an entire race of people that have this physical trait, then removing that trait from your child before they can make that decision for themselves suddenly becomes a thing. Whereas if it's the only one, the idea of making your child conformed isn't necessarily as egregious.
Well, here's the thing.
For whatever the reasons.
She's not the only one. They say that one is born one every 75 years, right? Now,
I mean, Clyden divulges that Clyden was reassigned at birth too.
Right. So there's so even if they were to say one in every 10,000 or whatever the number may be, but the way I see it is this to me is the analogy is like a human being born as a hermaphrodite, right? Which up until only recently was considered, for lack of a better term, like a deformity, right? Whereas today, I'm not an expert on the issue, but I would argue there's probably more of a movement to just say, no, this is not a problem. This is not a disability. Let's just leave the person as they are, right? Am I right about that or am I wrong? So that's
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly more. I think that, there's a movement with a lot of things. With a lot of things that we used to consider like a birth defect would now be considered a variation, I guess, for lack of a better term. Like even something like autism. It used to be the idea that we had to cure autism. Now there's sort of a movement to thinking more of just, no, this is just, some people are divergent, neurodivergent, and that's just the way they're born. Yeah. But anyway, again,
I get the message that they're like, I understand the message that they're trying to send, and it's a good message. But I just think that they could have framed the story differently in order to make that message jump out a little bit more and be a little bit easier to argue for.
Sure. Yep, I can agree with that. And I definitely agree that the twist with the female author at the end was convenient in two ways. The fact that well, maybe not the way they found her, but the fact that she ended up being like the Shakespeare of their culture was a little too convenient.
Especially considering she's still alive, right?
Yeah, right.
She's like, still writing books, and she's the ultimate author of their society.
Right. And she's more like the Dan Brown of the Moclan. There you go. Okay, so
it's
I
more
guess
like the James Patterson.
You know what? We forgot. We got to talk about a character. We're going to talk about a character every episode. And this episode, we're going to talk about Bortus.
Why would we talk about Bortus on this episode?
We don't talk about Bortus.
I'll just say, I mean, I'm not a huge fan. I've never been a huge fan of Worf, but I know exactly what they're going for with Worf. But I think that, sorry, I had it up. Who's the actor that plays Bortus?
Peter Macon.
Sorry, what is it?
Peter Macon.
Peter Macon. He is so much funnier than Michael Dorn. I'm not going to criticize Michael Dorn, but this guy does it better. Every word that comes out of this guy's mouth makes me laugh, and the biggest laugh is coming up soon in one of the future episodes, but he is just so deadpan, so funny. I mean, there's been Michael Dorns, there's been imitations of Michael Dorn. I don't think they could find a better actor on earth to play this character. What do you think, G.I. Jolie?
Like I said earlier, this episode has, single-handedly brought me one of my favorite television characters ever. And it's, they play his ignorance of human culture and human pop culture for laughs, and it's funny because it's charming and it's adorable. But it's also terrifying, and because I don't know if Worf or Bortus are ever meant to be like, their species are ever meant to be viewed as monsters, but they're kind of monstrous. They're huge, they're brooding, they're enforcer types, but it takes the span of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and a six-pack for him to see that, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. Like, he has, throughout the episode, everybody is trying to, like, get him to see reason, because he is like Clyden, where he is like, no, we have to reassign my child's gender, or else he'll never marry. No Moclan man would marry a female Moclan. That's just doesn't happen. Like, but it takes a cartoon for him to see the lesson in the episode, and that it's just refreshing.
Doesn't Bortus have a line right in that scene or related to that scene where he says the Santa wouldn't have been able to deliver presents if Rudolph had been killed as though his parents wanted?
Yes. And Malloy's like, well, I don't think that death was ever on the table, but sure. I scream laughed in the middle of the store, because that's when I was rewatching it on my phone in the store today. No one was around, thank God. But when they delivered that line, I just about died. Best ever. There's just like this childlike quality about Bortus it's not like Mice and Men childish. You know, it's just newness. It's a newness to human.
There's an innocence to him. It's a big, tough, scary guy, but he's completely innocent, and he's learning as he goes.
Yeah, exactly. And I to make a long story long, I love Bortus.
Yes, champion. Are you a fan of Bortus?
I'm a big fan of Bortus, as the show's Worf. I think they've been able to avoid a lot of the missteps that they made with the Worf character. They're keeping Bortus very simple. They're keeping him dry. He doesn't... I'm not bashing Worf either, but I think they tried to do too much with that character. Right. And they showed him angry all the time, and they showed him struggling with this and that. Bortus is just very stoic, and they don't try to do too much with him.
Yeah.
And I think he works as a really good foil to Captain Mercer as well, because he's a little bit more irreverent. There's one scene in particular from going back to the very first episode where they're introducing all the characters at the very beginning, and Mercer asks, "Oh, so you're an all-male race? I guess there's not a lot of problems with leaving the toilet seat up." And then there's that back and forth. Oh, Moclans only urinate once a year.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm up 3 or 4 times a night. That's unfortunate. Yes, it is.
He's like, oh my God, I feel bad. I feel bad for you.
See, and that's great humor because it comes out of the characters, right? Like it's unique to those characters. And I think you hit a nail on the head about Worf. Worf never clicked for me, and I think the reason might be it's almost like when you create a character that's so, I guess he's alien, right? It's almost like James Bond or Batman. Sometimes with fictional characters, they get too much into their heads and it stops making sense. With Worf, it's like, you have an object, and when you get too close to it, it starts to fall apart a little bit. And with Worf, it's like he would have worked better as a foil, like Bortus does. But with Worf, it's like, oh no, we're gonna find out about his his son and his ex-wife and his brother and his parents and his culture. And it's almost like it was too much, and maybe Michael Dorn couldn't carry that weight, or the character couldn't carry that weight. But with Bortus, you're right. It's like, no, just keep him over here as the foil, and he works so much better. I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, I think you're right there too. They overcomplicated Worf's character with all that stuff. We didn't need to know about his Russian foster parents. We didn't need to know about his little annoying kid.
Right.
We didn't need any of that stuff, and it just gave Michael Dorn more dimensions to try and play. Like his shoes got bigger and bigger and bigger to fill, to the point that I don't think that he had it in him. And that's nothing against him, right? But that's not the role that he was brought into to play at the beginning. Like he was just this Klingon that stood in the background, and he became a far bigger character than I think that anyone was really ready for.
I think the thing is... Oh, go ahead, Jolie.
When you sort of convolute that with him always just like muttering in Klingon, it becomes exhausting.
Right.
And unlovable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
because
like
he had some moments where it was like, oh, Worf, you're hilarious.
Right.
But it was just never as clean as Bortus.
And I think it's kind of like you said, Ian, is like, instead of showing us his son and showing us his Russian parents and showing us all this, it works better as a reference. Like, remember there's an episode coming up where they say something about when you lose your tooth, and then one of them makes a joke about, let me guess. And I can't remember how the joke plays out, but that works better for Bortus, that you can leave everything kind of vague so that when there's an opportunity to make a joke out of it, you can just make the joke. And who cares, instead of like mapping out the entire history of his race and his backstory, just leave it all vague so that it's fodder for good little one-liners and these one-off little episodes once in a while, right?
Stuff you can use if you need it, but it's not important. Like
Exactly.
none of the stuff that they shoehorned into the Worf character was important.
You know what?
And it just distracted you from it.
In 7 seasons of Perfect Strangers, I don't think we ever saw Mipos, did we? I don't think so.
Just some flashbacks.
I think
and
it worked.
Running goats.
Right, but when Balky, when we knew how backward Mipos was, but then and Larry was trying to find, well, what does Mipos has? And Balky was like, well, we got a 7-Eleven. We don't need to see the 7-Eleven. It works better as a one-liner from Balky, right? There you go. We solved it. That is what makes Bortus work. Anyway, so there you go. Another great episode of the Orville, right, guys?
Absolutely.
Yeah, probably the best one yet. Again, not perfect, but hey, it's only episode 3, right? So there's still room to improve. But rewatching these episodes, I couldn't wait. I forced myself to stop, going on to the next one. So we'll be doing that soon, though. But yeah, we want to thank you guys for joining us this week for our review of the Orville episode 3. You can find all of our episodes on Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Twitter, Facebook,
Pretty much
YouTube.
Wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search MORE-VILLE Orville on the Comic Book Syndicate Network.
Yes. Oh, I'd also like to thank G.I. Jolie and Champion for designing our logo.
Oh.
Kind of teamed up on that, right?
Did we finish that? Or did I just go to bed?
I think it's done, but yeah,
it was,
might be some
it was shaping
tweaks.
up.
Yeah. And we want to thank Motion Array for providing the theme song. It is a canned theme song. I hope it doesn't turn up in other people's podcasts, but I did search long and hard for it, so there's more where that came from.